Black Sabbath were a British heavy metal band originally from Birmingham. That's Birmingham, not Birmingham, Alabama, Birmingham, England. They were formed in 1968 and they are known for being a foundational metal band, especially in the area of doom metal. They incorporated horror themes into their music. The thinking was that people enjoyed watching horror films and reading horror comics and reading horror books. Why not listen to horror music as well? They were known for being fronted by Ozzy Osbourne, and that was true up until 1979, when he was replaced by Ronnie James Dio, and then again he was replaced in 1983 by Ian Gillan. They were actually led by Tommy Iommi, who was the guitarist and main songwriter. And from the 1980s onwards, mid 80s, he was the only constant, and there was a lot of toing and froing. They had some stoppage, they had some reformage, all sorts of complications. They did, through all this, manage to release 19 studio albums. Hi, my name's Dan, and this is a review of the album Sabbath Bloody Sabbath by Black Sabbath, released in 1973, which was their fifth studio album and my first time listening to it. And this has been described as heavy metal by various respectable people and hard rock as well by Acclaimed Music. Now, I would it's a difficult thing, and I'm not really sure which side of the coin I'm on with this. At the time, or a few years after this, the definition of this would have been heavy metal. Somewhere at the very end of the 80s, early 90s, metal went through a profound musical transition to sound much, much heavier than it ever had been kind of before that. I guess through the 80s, it was building towards this. So by today's standards, this would not be thought of as metal because compared with today's metal, it sounds much more like hard rock. But at the time, it was heavy metal. Anyway, we've definitely got some heavy stuff mostly. There's overdriven guitar. There's a lot of this guitar, which is kind of the biggest thing in the mix, generally. Bass often following the same kind of lines as the guitar, which is quite indicative of metal, quite chuggy at times. There are bits where you could say, oh, yeah, that sounds like it's been detuned, which was a thing that Sabbath were into, but not massively doom laden. Okay. So in lots of ways, I would say it's more akin to Deep Purple without the organ, or Rush. I'm going to mention Rush a few times. Canadian heavy rock / metal band. Also, so the distinctive high ethereal voice of Ozzy gives it a particular sound. Again, Geddy Lee of Rush has got a high voice. It doesn't sound quite like Rush. I could tell the difference between them, but there is a similarity there, I would say. Also, on the vocals, despite it being quite lacking in high-end consonants, so the kind of S's and the T's particularly have kind of been muted out by, I don't know if it was a natural thing from the technology or if it had been done deliberately, but it's actually quite easy to work out the words, or I think so, despite that. And I think it's probably because it musically kind of sits higher than almost everything else, vocals. So it's in its own sonic space, really. Mostly we've got just drums and drums, bass, and guitar, and with the guitar definitely at the fore. There are some other things come in. There's some synth in various places. One track has keyboard playing by Rick Wakeman. One track has strings. There's some acoustic guitar passages in as well. But mostly it's kind of riff based rock, moving through a number of sections, some guitar solos. It's fairly varied and interesting. And just to carry on the comparison with Rush, I prefer Rush, but this still is pretty good, I would say. Songs are actually a mix. Mostly they're kind of fantasy and sci-fi. There's a song about DNA. There's a song about how does the sperm get chosen that actually manages to fertilize the egg? And there's other stuff as well. There is some kind of fantasy, spiritual stuff maybe in here, but it's not as dark as I thought it was going to be, knowing who they are. There is one song about substance abuse, which is something that I understand at this point they had by now had a decent amount of experience with. And in fact, I understand that there were problems getting the album going at points because of this, but they did manage to get into it. And it doesn't, the album itself doesn't sound like it's kind of drenched in substance abuse. So, yeah. Overall, then, feeling is actually quite decent. I quite enjoyed it, and I especially, I think, like the Aussie aspect and the sound of his voice on this. So, yeah, a fairly engaging album. As always, though, I'd love to know what you think. So please, will you let me know by sharing me a comment? But that's it from me for now.